In our last video, we looked at futures vignettes, those short stories that help us imagine what a potential future might be like. Today, we are looking at futures artifacts, which are similar to vignettes, but can result in physical models or other things that you can interact with. So future artifacts are imaginative tools designed to provoke thought about possible futures. They provide a physical or visual form to abstract ideas about what the future might look like. These artifacts are not predictions, but speculative representations that challenge our assumptions and stimulate dialogue about the future. Futures artifacts allow us to visualize and interact with potential futures, making them less abstract and more concrete. By doing so, they can help organizations and individuals think critically about the future, fostering innovation and more informed decision making. They also can encourage us to question current trajectories and explore alternative futures. One of the main strengths of futures artifacts is their ability to engage people in a hands-on way. By making abstract concepts tangible, they foster creativity and can help participants think outside the box or in unusual, non-conventional ways. Additionally, they serve as excellent tools for engaging stakeholders in discussions about the future, enabling a collaborative exploration of different possibilities. While futures artifacts are powerful tools, they can sometimes oversimplify complex issues or be misinterpreted as predictions rather than speculative explorations. Additionally, creating these artifacts can be resource intensive, requiring time, expertise, and materials that may not always be available. Best way to understand these better is to have a look at some case studies. And we're going to start by looking at eCampus Ontario's project, where they designed speculative educational technologies for the year 2033. These artifacts were used to provoke discussions about the evolving role of technology in education, privacy concerns, and the future relationship between learners and educators. This case study highlights how futures artifacts can bring complex issues to life in a simple but engaging way. So you can see from the slide, they produced a series of mock-ups. So they're a step above wireframes or sketches. They're really fleshed out designs meant to look like a potential finished product. A couple more that they created. One was the Accelerator Course Creator, which was to mock up an AI-powered curriculum creator, and also a learning credit system, which would enable Canadians to accelerate their academic programs, recognise skill acquired from informal sources and industrial experiences, and provide a quantifiable measure of skills. So immediately, these are somewhat similar to the vignette, some of the examples we looked at in the last video, that these are just images, but even though they are just images, they are far more powerful than trying to, for example, explain these products with words alone. Futures artifacts are applied in various contexts. In strategic foresight and policy making, they can help test scenarios and explore implications of different decisions. In innovation workshops, they inspire new product designs or services by imagining how current trends might evolve. Museums also use them to engage the public in reflecting on how today's objects might be viewed by future generations. This is a really interesting case study called the Future Relics project that was run by Google and India. And they collaborated with museums, and they invited museum visitors to imagine which contemporary objects might become archaeological relics in the distant future. So this interactive installation allowed participants to reflect on what our current culture values and what might be remembered by future generations. So this resulted in a powerful example of how futures artefacts can engage the public in thinking about long-term societal change and impact. So essentially what they did was they invited visitors to the museums to answer the question, what object would you like archaeologists 1,000 years from now to remember our present day culture by? The top 10 answers were then translated into 3D rendering, which was then turned into clay. So they took the idea from how pots throughout history have been used to convey information and stories and depictions of important events. And they took that idea and put a modern spin on it, and via 3D printing and other technology created these pots that we can see, where they took the top 10 terms that were answered, which included mobile phone, car and computer, turned those into Hindi and then imprinted them on the vases. So this one's a bit more, I guess, artistic, esoteric, depends how you look at it. A little bit outside the remit of traditional futures artifacts work, but certainly an interesting example to be aware of. Something a bit more down to earth that we can look at is a case study in urban mobility research. So here prototypes like the pop-up flying car and the autobus, self-driving buses, were developed as futures artifacts. So these, I think it was in Copenhagen, I think it was. These prototypes allowed researchers and city planners to test futuristic transportation systems within real urban settings. Now what they did for these, it's not a truly self-driving bus. It does have a driver there. It did have some self-driving capabilities, but not fully. But what they wanted to do with these tests was mock up what a self-driving bus system would look like. So they had the stops and the buses and the sort of infrastructure behind it. And they invited lots of people to come and test this new system and give their feedback. They also wanted to create a pop-up flying car artifact, but they couldn't because of one of the main drawbacks for futures artifacts, which is it's not always easy to build these things. So they had to make do with a 3D rendering of the pop-up flying car. This is perhaps my favourite example of recent futures artifacts work. The Royal Society commissioned an exhibition of 7 objects that would help create an imaginary but plausible world of research in 2035. So they were focused on what research might look like in the future. And the one you can see on the screen here is called the Lab Cab. Now this to me is what I think of as when I think of futures artifacts. It's really detailed, it's very striking, it's unlike something that you will have seen before. And to explain what it is, we can have a look at the designer's notes. So they visualized a future where LabCab would become the first transport service in the UK to be accredited for the transportation of live tissue, and it would allow a live tissue to be taken from hospitals and public labs to community hack spaces and home labs. So they envisioned a future where there were unsafe and illicit labs working on biological hacking, biohacking, not just taking vitamins and minerals, but like actively biohacking live tissue. How would that tissue get regulated and transported safely and securely? And this is what the designer came up with, and it's a cool box. In their vision, this has been used from 2026 to 2028 to transport live samples of tissue around Greater Manchester. They even came up with a backstory of what laws might be put in place in the future to allow for this. So I think this is an amazing example of a futures artifact, and certainly one that you can aspire to if you're looking to try something within the future artifacts space yourself. At perhaps the other end of the scale regarding scope and size, we have an exhibition that was called The Mitigation of Shock. This envisioned what London 2050 might look like if climate change continued or accelerated, and it focused on climate change and its consequences on food security. So they mocked up an entire flat with growing tents and obviously a very heavy emphasis on how whoever lived here in the future would provide themselves with adequate food. We're assuming there's been some degree of societal collapse when it comes to food production. So not only do you have big grow tents and grow lights, you have a mocked up newspaper as well to help you set the scene. Even great small touches like a partially finished cup of coffee and some crumbs of a biscuit. Some really sci-fi looking tubes, and in the window they had a bit of artwork that suggested what London might look like in 2050 with climate change rampant. So you can imagine that this was not a easy, quick thing to put together at all. There's a long list of contributors, and if you're interested in learning more, I recommend Googling Mitigation of Shock London, and there's an excellent site that tells you far more details about it. So in conclusion, futures artifacts can be a lot of work, almost always a lot of work, but if a picture paints 1,000 words, what value could an artifact do? If you're trying to explain your vision to a stakeholder or the public, or you're trying to get funding, or you're trying to encourage colleagues to think outside the box in different ways, imagine different futures, perhaps shock them into thinking about things they wouldn't normally think about, then futures artifacts are a great way to do this. And again, I think the lab cab examples are amazing, because I think most people that see that are shocked by the idea of having live tissue transported around the cities to people to experiment on at home. But then that prompts the question, why would that be a shocking thing to do? And then you can start to have a really interesting discussion about biomedical ethics and the future of biohacking and life extension and all of that. So big fan of futures artifacts, as you can probably tell. Love to know if you've ever done anything like this yourself, or if this is something you'd like to learn more about, perhaps have some guidance on how you can build some artifacts yourself. If you are, please let me know in the comments below. But I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.